I'm Ken Whiting, and in this video, we're going to talk about what is probably the biggest question to answer in the world of kayaking, which is how to choose the right kayak. But fortunately, it's pretty easy because, there's not that many choices. You only have sit on top kayaks, sit inside kayaks, recreational kayaks, touring kayaks, sea kayaks, whitewater kayaks, portable kayaks, fishing kayaks, folding kayaks, skin on frame kayaks, inflatable kayaks, modular kayaks, tandem kayaks, pedal kayaks, composite kayaks, and plastic kayaks. Okay, so there are a few kayaks to choose from, and it is a challenging question. It can be an overwhelming question to answer. And it's really important that you get it right, because if you don't get it right, well, it can very easily lead to an unsafe experience, an uncomfortable experience, or even just an experience that's not much fun at all. Regardless, there's a good chance that that's it. You'll be done with kayaking all because you chose the wrong kayak. So it's important to get it right. And so let's dive right into how to choose the right kayak. Now, when choosing a kayak, you have to ask yourself a number of questions, and some of these answers are going to be preferences, whereas others are going to be truly limiting factors. And so let's start with the questions that are limiting factors. And the first one relates to the type of paddling that you want to do. And so let's take a good look at that. If you're going to be paddling flat water, well, it's really not a limiting factor. Any kayak will do the trick on flat water. But it's important to understand when I say flat water, I'm not talking about water that's flat right now. I'm talking about water that will always be flat. Even if a windstorm, a thunderstorm blows through, that water is going to stay flat. And that means you're paddling on small bodies of water, ponds, small lakes, rivers with very mild current, if any. Really flat water. If you're not just dealing with flat water, if you're going into or want to go into water that isn't protected from wind and waves, so bigger lakes, if there's wind starts blowing, you can get some decent little waves on it, or rivers that have more than just slow moving current, actually can have little waves that can splash water, dump water into your kayak. Well, that changes things. If you're dealing with mild, rough water, first of all, sit-on-top kayaks are great. And the reason sit-on-top kayaks are great is because they can't swamp. If water dumps onto your kayak, say a wave breaks on you, it's just going to drain out through the scupper holes of the kayak. Secondly, if you flip, not a big deal. You can roll the kayak back upright. It's not swamped. You can just climb right back on and keep going, or drag the boat, swim the boat to shore, get back in there and keep going. Now, sit-inside kayaks are more complicated. In order for a sit-inside kayak to be able to handle even mild rough water, it really needs two things. It needs the ability to handle a skirt. And that means a smaller cockpit. It doesn't need to be a tiny cockpit, but a smaller cockpit that has a cockpit rim or coaming on it, so that you can use a skirt over the cockpit. And that stops waves that are splashing on top of you from just all that water from dumping in your boat and swamping you. The second thing your sit-inside kayak needs is at least one bulkhead. A bulkhead is a wall inside the kayak that divides the kayak into different sections. Now, basic kayaks, sit-inside kayaks designed for mild rough water, will have one bulkhead right behind the seat. In fact, basic sit-inside recreational kayaks, even that aren't designed for rough water, will have this because it's a great thing to have in a kayak. And the reason for that is if the kayak swamps, if you were to capsize, if a wave broke over you, whatever reason, only the cockpit and the front of the kayak is going to fill with water. The back part of the kayak, which you access through a hatch on the deck of the kayak, that's going to stay filled with air. It's like having this big life jacket on your kayak. It makes it so much easier to deal with instead of a fully swamped kayak. And if you're offshore a good distance in rough water, in wavy conditions, if you have a fully swamped kayak, it's a nightmare. At least if you have half of the kayak still filled with air, you can much more easily drag it to shore, tow it to shore, do what you need to do, even do a re-entry on the water. Even better than that is having a kayak with multiple bulkheads. Having a bulkhead behind the seat separates the back of the kayak into one section, and then another bulkhead in front of your feet. And that separates the whole front of the kayak into its own section. So if you swamp or if you flip, only the center of the kayak, the cockpit area, is going to fill with water. Makes it even easier to deal with on the water, easier for on-water rescues or re-entries, much easier to tow the boat, swim the boat, do whatever you need to get it to shore. There is an option. If your kayak doesn't have bulkheads, like many portable kayaks, portable sea kayaks in particular, don't have bulkheads, they simply can't have watertight bulkheads in them. What you can use instead is float bags in the kayak. As long as the float bags are securely held in place inside the kayak, that will serve the same purpose. It'll provide the flotation if for some reason the kayak gets swamped. Now, the next big limiting factor when choosing a kayak is portability. But first, a quick thank you to this video's sponsor, and it's Paddleways. It's a new and free app designed by paddlers for paddlers, and those are few and far between. More specifically, it's an app designed to be an all-in-one tool for knowing how, where, and when to go paddling. It's like an interactive guidebook where you can find all the information you need to plan your paddling trip. You can measure distances, view access points, campsites, check the weather, and water levels. You can even find shuttle services and see other paddlers' notes and photos. It's a collaboration between NRS, On Water, and American Whitewater, and it's a new app. There's lots of information up there right now, but there's more and more going up every day. And so head to the App Store or Google Play to download it. It's a cool tool. All right, now when it comes to portability, if you don't have the means of transporting a full-size kayak, or you don't have the place to store a full-size kayak, well, you need a portable kayak. Portable kayaks aren't just reserved for people who can't transport and store. Some people just want a portable kayak, and that's fine. The great news is that there's lots of portable kayaks to choose from. There's been an incredible development of portable kayaks over the past 10 years. In fact, I use portable kayaks quite a bit when I'm traveling, like the Kayak Bluefin 142, which is a 14-foot hardshell sea kayak that's a modular kayak. It has 6 different sections that snap together, and it really does perform like a normal kayak. I've also been using the track kayak for almost 20 years. It's a skin-on-frame kayak where you build the bow and stern frames, slide them into the skin of the kayak, and then they connect with hydraulic jacks that push the frames apart and put the whole kayak under tension. Inflatable kayaks have also come a long way. They used to be pretty simple, but now they come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, like the Sea Eagle 380X, which is designed to be super stable and to be able to handle up to Class 4 whitewater, or the Decathlon X500, which is an inflatable kayak that doesn't just have a flat bottom, it has a V-hull like a good hardshell kayak. Now, the reason not to go for a portable kayak, well, there are a few of them. First of all, financial. You do sometimes pay a premium for the portable nature of the kayak, but that's not always the case. Performance is one area where you do pay a price. Portable kayaks don't tend to perform as well as a similar hardshell kayak. Durability is another area where you pay a price, even though they've come a long way. Quality portable kayaks are remarkably durable, but they're not quite as durable as full hardshell kayaks. Comfort is another area you sacrifice because of the minimalist nature of portable kayaks. They have to be able to fit in a bag. They can't have the same robust outfitting that a hardshell kayak has. And so you do tend to pay a little bit of a price when it comes to your comfort in a kayak. Now, portability goes beyond whether or not a kayak fits into a bag or into the trunk of your car, or you can store in the closet in your apartment. Portability also comes down to the length and the weight of the kayak. For example, a 10 or 11-foot kayak is a whole lot easier to move around than a 17-foot long kayak. But length isn't as much of a limiting factor as weight is. I've tested kayaks between 20 pounds and 160 pounds for a similar length kayak. That's a huge variance, and that can be a limiting factor. For some people, 160 pounds is simply not an option. In fact, 60 pounds might not be an option. Weight can truly be a limiting factor. The biggest factor that determines the weight of a kayak is the material it's made from. Now, and kayaks are made from a variety of materials. The most common material is plastic, made by a process called rotomolding. Now, rotomolded kayaks are incredibly durable. You can bounce these things off rocks, you can drag them on the ground. This is why whitewater kayaks are rotomolded. But the downside of rotomolded kayaks is that they're the heaviest kayaks. Thermoformed kayaks are also plastic kayaks, but they're about 20% lighter than rotomolded kayaks. They are made with a thinner but harder plastic that makes the kayak much more rigid. It gives the kayak better performance, but they definitely aren't as durable as rotomolded kayaks. These are kayaks where you can use, but you can't abuse them. You have to take care of them. If you were to hit a rock hard enough or tie it down too hard onto a roof rack system, you can actually crack the plastic. Composite kayaks are also lighter than rotomolded kayaks, and they're a good option for a lot of people. Composite kayaks are made from a combination of a fabric with epoxy, fiberglass, you've got carbon Kevlar, and there's a new company, Melker, who's actually creating fabrics with locally sourced flax for environmental purposes, as well as cork. And regardless, the result is a really hard, stiff, and smooth kayak that travels beautifully through the water. The downside is the price. You have to expect to spend between 50% to 200% more than a comparable rotomolded kayak. Durability is also an issue depending on the layup. Because you're using fabric and epoxy, you can have thicker layups, which make the kayak more durable, but they also make the kayak heavier. The thinner layups make the kayak, you can get some really light kayaks this way, but they're also not nearly as durable, and you have to be very careful with them. Now let's talk about preferences. And we're going to start with stability or speed. You have to make a choice. What's more important to you, stability or speed? Or maybe they're both equally important, but there's 4 factors that impact a kayak's stability or its speed, and that's length, width, rocker, and hull design. And I'm going to quickly get into each of those, starting with length. Simple rule there, the longer a kayak is, the faster it is. The shorter it is, the slower it's going to be. Length doesn't impact stability though. Width, on the other hand, impacts both speed and stability. The wider a kayak is, the slower it's going to be, but the more stable it will be. The narrower a kayak is, the faster it'll be, but the less stable it will be. Now, rocker is the curvature of a kayak from bow to stern when you look at it from the side. And the banana shape of the kayak. The more banana shape, the more rocker a kayak has, the slower it's going to be. The flatter its profile is, then the faster it will be. Now the trade-off there isn't stability. It doesn't impact stability whatsoever. It impacts maneuverability. The more curvature it has, the more rocker a kayak has, the more maneuverable, the easier it is to turn that boat. So the next preference is sit on top versus sit inside kayak. And so let's just talk about the benefits of both, starting with sit on top kayaks. The benefit of sit on top kayaks is that they, well, first and foremost, they prioritize stability over speed. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Sit on top kayaks, when you're sitting on top of them, and so your center of gravity is higher. And so in order for that kayak to be as stable as an equivalent sit inside, it needs to be wider. And that means the kayak's going to be, by nature, slower. Rather than fighting that, manufacturers have said, you know what, let's not fight it. Let's just double down on stability of sit-on-top kayaks. And so, as a general rule, sit-on-top kayaks are designed to be stable, 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 and they give up a fair amount of performance. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, and for this rule, you've got kayaks like the Swell Watercraft Scupper 14, a sit-on-top kayak that is actually designed to perform very much like a sit-inside kayak, and it does a great job. But as a whole, sit-on-top kayaks are designed for stability first. Sit-on-top kayaks are also very comfortable. You're sitting in this big, wide open platform. You can go cross-legged, you can hang your feet over the side. They can be extremely comfortable boats. A lot of quality sit-on-top kayaks will even have luxurious framed seats. And one of the benefits of framed seats is that it lifts your butt higher than your heels. And when your butt's higher than your heels and you're sitting in a kayak, the benefit of that is that the angle of your body is reduced. It's no longer, if your butt's low, it's a 90-degree angle that you're bent at. And for some people who aren't very flexible, that can be harder, especially not flexible in the hamstrings and legs. That can be a harder position to hold. Whereas if you're sitting up, it can be much easier on people that are low on flexibility or have bad lower backs. Another benefit of sit-on-top kayaks is they don't swamp, which we've already talked about. They are filled with air and they have scuppers so that if water comes onto the deck, the water just drains right out of them. And the last benefit of sit-on-top kayaks is accessibility. They are a lot easier to get onto and off from because you're not stepping down as far as you are with a sit-inside kayak. You know, I kind of equate it to sit on top is like stepping into the shower, whereas a sit inside is like stepping down into the tub. And so accessibility is a real benefit with sit-on-top kayaks. Now, sit-inside kayaks, the biggest benefit of a sit-inside kayak is performance. First, you have speed. Just like sit-on-top kayaks have to be wider because the center of gravity is higher when you're sitting on them, sit-inside kayaks, you're deeper in them, your center of gravity is lower. The kayak can be narrower and still have great stability. And a narrower kayak travels through the water more efficiently. And so, as a rule, sit-inside kayaks are faster than comparable sit-on-top kayaks. The other benefit when it comes to performance is control. A sit-inside kayak, you have more touch points, more control over the kayak because you have more contact with the kayak. I compare sit-on-tops and sit-insides to flip-flops and trail shoes. The sit-on-top is like a flip-flop. You're just on top of that platform and you really don't have much control. A sit-inside kayak is much more like a trail shoe where it wraps around you, and some of the higher performance sit-inside kayaks, you have thigh hooks, you have back bands, you have a lot of control. You can tackle much more aggressive water in a sit-inside kayak than you can in a sit-on-top kayak. Sit-inside kayaks also have a comfort benefit. You don't have the same freedom of movement that you do on sit-on-top kayaks, but they do offer protection from wind and water. When you paddle a sit-on-top kayak, you have to expect that you're going to get wet. When you paddle a sit-inside kayak, you don't need to get wet. Sit-inside kayaks also have an accessibility benefit. Well, it's not that they're easier to get into than a sit-on-top kayak, they're harder, but sit-inside kayaks are typically 20% lighter than sit-on-top kayaks because there's less materials in them. And that can be a huge difference maker for a lot of people. Also, there are more options in some of the lighter materials, the thermoformed kayaks, the composite kayaks. You typically have a lot more options for sit-inside kayaks in those lighter materials than you do for sit-on-top kayaks. Now let's talk about tandem kayaking versus single kayaks. Do you want a tandem kayak or a single kayak? Well, let's talk about the benefits of tandem kayaks. The benefits are, well, first of all, tandem kayaks, when you have two people paddling, they're faster than single kayaks. The other nice thing about tandem kayaks is that one person, well, only the person in the front, can actually take a break from paddling and you can still travel. The third benefit is that it balances the playing field. And so if you have two paddlers with very different skills and experience in a tandem kayak, you can now go experience the same thing. Now, the downsides of tandem kayaks, well, first and foremost, you're stuck with that person for the duration of the trip. you better like them. The second one is you better be out there in the same kayak for the same reasons. And a lot of people paddle for different reasons. And so tandem kayaks, there's a reason they're called divorce boats. And the third downside to tandem kayaks is that they're not as maneuverable as single kayaks. Now let's talk about pedal versus paddle kayaks. Now, pedal kayaks are something you see a lot more on the water these days, especially for kayak fishing. The real benefit of pedal kayaks, well, there's a couple. For one, you might be surprised to hear this, but they're actually faster than paddle kayaks. I was surprised to discover that when I started trying pedal kayaks. The second benefit of a pedal kayak, and probably the biggest benefit of the pedal kayak, is that your hands are virtually free to do other things. Although it should be noted, you do steer with a little toggle on the side of the kayak. And so you're not completely hands-free, but much more free than when you're paddling. That's awesome for fishing. That's why pedal kayaks are so popular with kayak anglers, but it's also fantastic for photographers, and videographers, for anybody who wants to be doing something at the same time. The third big benefit of pedal kayaks, not for everybody, but for some people, is comfort. Some people, maybe it's bad shoulders and they just can't comfortably paddle. But some people with bad backs really like the sitting position, which is more of a lounge, lazy boy style sitting position in a pedal kayak with your feet out in front of you. It really depends on your own individual needs. Now, the downside of pedal kayaks, well, there's three key ones. First and foremost, price. You pay a hefty premium for the pedal drive system. You have to expect to pay at least $900 more for a pedal kayak that's the same as a non-pedal kayak. One argument there is, well, you don't need to paddle. You save on that. Well, you don't, because you still need a paddle as a backup when you have a pedal kayak. What happens if the pedal drive system fails? What happens if the water is too shallow and the pedal drive system won't work? You need to get a paddle anyway. That brings us to the second disadvantage of pedal kayaks is shallow water. They aren't good in shallow water. They're not good in water with heavy vegetation. The pedal drive system can easily get bunged up, and it needs more draft. It needs more space to work effectively. The third disadvantage of pedal kayaks is maneuverability in tight places. And that's the other reason that you really need to bring a paddle with you. If the pedal system won't let you turn around, well, you have to bust out the paddle. Well, by answering the question of what makes sense for you in relation to the limiting factors and these preferences, you've really narrowed down the type of kayak that makes sense for you. But there are some other considerations. I mean, camping being one. Do you want to be able to go camping with your kayak? And if you do, you need enough space in the kayak or on the kayak to be able to store the gear and the capacity. It has to be able to hold that extra weight. Similarly, do you like to bring your dog? If you do want to bring your dog onto the kayak, well, depending on how big your dog is, you're going to need a kayak that is extra stable and has that extra capacity. This can easily lead you down the road of hybrid boats. There's some wonderful hybrid boats that many people wouldn't call kayaks. They're not kayaks, they're hybrids, like pack boats, which are hybrids between canoes and kayaks. They're canoes that you sit in like a kayak. It has a seat, the foot pegs in front of you. You use a kayak paddle, and so you get the control benefits of a kayak and the paddling benefits of a kayak, but you get the tripping benefits of a canoe. You've got tons of space where you can put a couple of big packs. So when you get to a portage, you just throw the pack on your back, throw the pack boat on your head, and off you go. Then you have pack rafts. Pack rafts are hybrids between rafts and kayaks. And pack rafts, amazingly, can weigh as little as 5 pounds. And they can open up bodies of water that otherwise were pretty much inaccessible. To carry another boat up there would have been a lot of work. Well, pack rafts change the game. They let you access these bodies of water with a small, portable boat that can also handle some serious whitewater. Well, there's a fire hose of information for you. I hope it does prove helpful because this really is such an important question to nail the answer on. It will make the difference between having a safe and an unsafe, a comfortable, an uncomfortable, or even a fun and an unfun paddling experience. My last piece of advice is to visit a specialty paddle sports retailer. Take this information, these answers you have, visit a specialty paddle sports retailer, ask them some more questions. Heck, demo some kayaks and get a real feel for them firsthand on the water. And that will be the last step in ensuring you have the ultimate kayak for your needs. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and have found it useful at all. Leave a comment down below if you have anything to add, and stay tuned because I got lots more paddling tips, paddling gear reviews, and paddling adventures coming your way. Oh, and subscribe too. And hit the notification bell. I'm telling you, do a lot of things here. But yeah, hit that notification bell so that the next video I put out, you're gonna be notified about. Unless you didn't like this, but if you're watching this part right now, it means you just sat through like almost a half an hour of video, so you must like it a little bit. Hit the notification bell. It's the least you could do.